Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the mornings. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, hey, there's the button, everybody. Okay, well, I pressed the button and started going, but it didn't sound like anything was coming through, and lo, it was not. Good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, February 22nd, 2023. Time for another show. And by the look of the things on my phone's map at the moment, the bus is arriving for the high schoolers, so hopefully everything is A-okay. A little rainy this morning, which is nothing compared to what the rest of you are in for. And I guess there's been snow already starting in long ago. I think in the big winter storm, a 1-2 punch for a large swath of the country, but that the map looks to be avoiding our little corner of the world, but probably snowing all over Justice Putnam. And everybody on the Northwest, the Pacific Northwest, and then the big swath across the country into like Minnesota and across the northern tier, and I guess finally into northern New England at the end of all this. But it does take a northern trajectory, so I guess we won't be getting that. And I don't know if we got any snow here this winter, and it's not entirely over, but we're kind of getting out of the range for snow. And I think tomorrow here in the Virginia area, we're going to be like flirting with the low 80s in temperature. It's going to, snap right back. It's in the 50s today. It'll be in the 50s on Friday, but tomorrow apparently 80 degrees. So that'll probably kill all of our cherry trees, or at least all the cherry blossoms for this year, because they're out already. They shouldn't be, but, global warming and all of that. Well, it's becoming an issue. Let's put it that way. All right. Plenty to catch up on today. It is Wednesday. It's Ash Wednesday. For those of you who are out of ashes, free ashes being given out, I guess, at the Catholic churches. So stop in and get yours. Limited supply, I suppose. Anyway, yeah, it's Ash Wednesday. The pączki are gonchki. We got rid of all of them. That's not a big part of tradition in our household or anything. I just wanted some donuts, and they looked good. So high praise for the Polish community for bringing those treats to us. That was fun. Wednesday also means Greg Dworkin should be on hand, and we'll hear from him later on for his roundup, his raft o' stories. And, they're getting crazier and crazier every day. Murdery Trader Green on a tear, calling for civil war once again. There's just no stopping her. And of course, now that there's no social media companies interested in reining in that sort of speech, but rather, permitting it, celebrating it, boosting it, and, replicating it, well, who knows where all of that ends. Let's see. The new donors and boosters keep rolling in. I thought I had us all caught up, and then lo and behold, our announcement of new sponsors has sparked yet more activity. Michael Mayholtz, I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, a new sponsor as of the 21st. That was yesterday. So it looks like every time I mention this, I guess the more people I mention, maybe more people just join in, or they say, I should be getting in on that action. I'm not certain what the action is, but we make shows, you enjoy them, and I guess that's all the action there needs to be. A couple of notes via email in the last day or two. Let me see if there's no real way to pocket store those, but I try starring them so I can go back and find them. And Renata Riffy, I'm not certain of your pronunciation either. You got to put your name pronunciation. You don't have to. And if you don't mind my getting it wrong, as long as I fret over it, isn't that enough? But Renata pointing this interesting bit out regarding the story we read the other day on Oregon's law concerning paramilitaries. She notes that the Portland altercations between right-wing groups and Antifa, the anti-fascist groups, and the police have several complications. That's true, and I think we all... not all of us are necessarily aware of all the complications, certainly, but we've heard some of the stories. But first of all, the right-wing groups tend to travel into Portland to cause trouble. That does seem like we've heard that story before, either from out of state, as in from Washington perhaps, or from southern parts of Oregon. Secondly, Portland Police Department itself is riddled with white supremacists. That's problematic. That's true. Or I guess we should say, if true, but it is true, so I get you there. Certain police officers apparently used email to advise right-wing participants in these altercations about how to avoid getting arrested, which is a story we've heard here in D.C. We haven't actually covered that story. I mentioned it the other day, but there was some January 6th communication evidence between police officers in D.C., or prior to January 6th, just prior, and the Proud Boys, kind of giving them the same advice. But to continue on with Renata's comments here, the Portland Police Department is under a consent decree with the U.S. Department of Justice. The general opinion of protest onlookers is that the Portland Police Department plays favorites and comes down harder on Antifa and BLM protesters. And just another point or two here. In the 1980s, Portland was the skinhead capital of the United States. The Antifa group came about, or Antifa group. She's hyphenating this. I guess maybe I'm missing the pronunciation or the emphasis here. But at any rate, we all know what anti-fascist folks use for their, or the group label that's hung on them. But at any rate, the Antifa groups came in about that time in response to skinhead activities in the 80s. And Antifa makes things harder for themselves, in her opinion, and BLM as well, because of their penchant for property damage. The state of Oregon would like to crack down on the Portland Police Department, but is hampered by the public relations nightmare of leaning on the police while the Antifa idiots are breaking store windows. The smashy activity may have tapered off, though I haven't heard of this activity for a while. And that there certainly has been a better show of discipline among whatever you can't even really call them among their ranks, but and they certainly did a great job staying away from the temptation of January 6th as well. Their greatest PR triumph so far. Finally, Oregon has a strong white supremacist history, and we have heard about this in the past. Many of its early leaders were Confederate sympathizers. And until the year 2000, its constitution contained language barring black people from living in the state. That seems like they probably need to get rid of that. And I guess they have. Up until 2000 they had it, but I can't believe it survived until then. What saves Oregon is that 70% of the population lives in the Willamette Valley, and their political leanings drive the state. Other parts of Oregon lean closer to Alabama or West Virginia in their politics. So that is why both southern and eastern parts of Oregon want to secede from Oregon and either become a separate state or join Idaho. I hadn't heard about them joining Idaho. But interesting. But thank you for the note, and noting here that she's from Albany, Oregon, unless they pronounce their Albany differently, which is always possible. And then it says formerly Juneau, Alaska. That is to say, I guess she formerly lived there. Not that Albany, Oregon used to be known as Juneau, Alaska. I'm positive that that's not the case. Well, no, I'm not. Never positive. Never say never, I say. And never keep Greg waiting longer than 10 minutes is another good rule. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. We're fine with that. It
Okay.
takes a while for me to set up these days, so that's all good.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll all have a big party when the big computer comes back.
Yeah,
We'll
I
all
just
come
got
out to meet her
notified
when she
yesterday
comes.
by the Apple repair people that the new logic board came in.
All right.
And it didn't work.
Well, that's logical.
But the good news is it didn't work differently than the old one didn't work. So it's clearly the logic board.
Huh.
So they have to send out for yet another one. And when the one comes in that works, then I get my computer back, and who knows how long that takes.
Right. Well, your logic is undeniable.
In the meantime,
Yes.
Take 10 minutes because that's what it needs. So we're going to talk politics today, believe it or not.
Oh, I'm unprepared for that.
Well, there
No.
were elections yesterday, and we won.
Sound like I worried
Yay.
you. Yes.
Sort
There's
of.
all right.
Well, for
I'm for
example,
wins.
the big one that everybody was watching is the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
Right. But that's not over yet. That's the one.
That's exactly that's
Okay.
what I mean about sort of.
Okay.
We did well. We
Good.
did very well, as a matter of fact.
Ooh, wow.
Our candidate, Janet Protasewicz, And boy, did I spend all day trying to learn how to pronounce that.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Got 46.4% of the vote with 95% of the votes in. That's the latest one that I saw. There might even be more. Almost 1 million votes.
Hey.
Total. So it was like a big turnout. And the second place person, and the two of them will therefore go on to have the general election vote in April. The second place person is a fellow named Daniel Kelly. He got 24.3, just beating out Jennifer Doro, who got 21.8, and then the liberal Everett Mitchell came in at 7.5. So we basically got 54% of the vote, and the conservatives got 46 or so.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And I say that in terms of a conservative and liberal because it's ostensibly a nonpartisan election, and therefore you can't
wink. Yes.
Exactly, wink. So you can't put D or R after the name, but that's who they are. I mean, Daniel Kelly, the guy who's running, basically worked for the R's, and he supported Trump's challenge of who the electors were.
Yes,
I mean, the guy's a Republican. He's also a MAGA nutcase, but he's a Republican.
Yeah. Well, yes.
So Protasewicz got 46.4 and Kelly got 24.3. And as a matter of fact, Protasewicz was so strong and the election turnout leaned so Democratic yesterday that Protasewicz actually beat Daniel Kelly in crucial Waukesha County.
Wow, that is crucial.
Which is, of course, a conservative-leaning part of the, WOW counties that decide elections in Wisconsin. A little bit misleading because Jennifer Doro is from there and stole votes from Kelly.
Okay.
But still, that was pretty good performance.
Yeah.
So we're very happy about that. And I will remind people that Daniel Kelly really is a nutcase.
All right.
Okay, so Protasewicz says, I'll be running against somebody who doesn't think women get to make their own reproductive rights. I will guarantee you my opponent, if elected, will uphold the 1849 near total abortion ban. I can guarantee you that, she told supporters. In Waukesha County, Kelly told supporters, he plans to talk to as many Wisconsinites as possible about the importance of the Constitution, how it protects our liberty, and the novel threat that Janet Protasewicz is to the Supreme Court. She's promised to put her thumb on the scales of justice.
Oh.
Right? Instead of interpreting the law, she's going to, protect women.
Sure, right.
How dare she?
She's going to put her thumb on the scale instead of my thumb.
Right. This is an ancient form of dishonesty that's been universally condemned for thousands of years. Something you have to remember about Daniel Kelly. He served on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and he lost an election by 10 points.
Oh.
And
I don't think I knew that.
Jennifer Doro was the presiding judge, I guess, in one of those, car smashes into pedestrians trying to kill them elections.
Oh, yeah, all right.
And so trials. And so she was a rising star in the Republican Party, and Democrats figured she would be a stronger candidate. So they're sort of relieved and not happy, but they're relieved that Kelly is the opponent. Because they think he'll be easier to beat. And looking at the numbers,
certainly more people want to beat
they've
him.
got a really good chance of getting this seat, which is really important.
Good.
I was online with Armando yesterday, and Armando was being Armando, of course. And he said, so what's up with this election? And I said to him, what are you asking? Are you asking, individual facts about interesting things about
Crucial
one of the
Waukesha
candidates,
County?
or you just want to know who wins?
Oh.
And typically Armando said, I know what the stakes are. You don't have to tell me what the stakes are. I just want to know who's ahead.
Oh. Well, turn on the news.
Well, it's too early, but there's a lot of interesting things about the candidates who are going to win, which is to say the Democrats. No, I don't really care about that. I just want to know who wins.
All right.
Right? It only matters.
I mean, if you're not in Wisconsin,
or
maybe
3.
that's all you can
That's all I care about. We get 4, we win. We get 3, we lose. That's all.
Sure. Okay, well, I mean,
or when it comes to the Supremes, 5-4.
That's the basics.
I only care about 5.
It's it's hard to have the bandwidth for all of those elections, but it's nice that he cares.
Yeah, well, Armando's an old friend of mine, of ours, and I try to broaden his mind, and usually fails.
My mind's broad enough. I know how broad it is.
I know how broad it is. You don't need to tell me how broad it is. I just want to know who wins.
Well, why ask
10
you
minutes.
that?
This is a pretty good state for reporting. And in fact, 10 minutes later, it was pretty clear our candidate won.
All right. I mean, yeah, turn on the TV. But, it's like maybe he figured he would get the news early by talking to one of us.
Right. Somebody send me really good analysis. Well, okay. As soon as the vote comes in, I will.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there you go. Waiting for data again.
Right. That sort of thing.
Okay.
So Ben Wickler, head of the Democratic Party in Wisconsin, a very good guy. There were 958,839 votes cast statewide in this Wisconsin Supreme Court primary. That's closer than 997,000 in the 2018 Supreme Court general election. Remember, this was a primary. Top two vote getters go on. They had as many people vote yesterday as in the general election in 2018.
Yes.
Massive turnout. Explosive stakes. Election's going to be a barn burner.
All right.
Milwaukee turned out. We won.
Okay.
Basically is what happened.
Good. Continue. Keep going.
More Daniel Kelly votes in terms of, we talked about this the other day. Scott Walker appointed him.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But he said the legalization of same-sex marriage is an illegitimate exercise of state power. This is who he is.
Yeah.
So
one of these guys.
It's really important that he lose, and I think he will.
All
Meanwhile, other things happened
for America
in other states, like yours.
Mine? What happened? Mine's a Commonwealth.
Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, the home, the capital of the Confederacy, the home of George Allen, the home of Glenn Youngkin. Took a Virginia 4 district that was Biden plus 36.
Okay.
And turned it into a Jennifer McClellan plus 44 win yesterday.
Okay.
She clobbered her Republican opponent and became the first black representative of the House, as far as I know, from Virginia.
Black woman.
Woman representative.
Yes. Yeah, that's exciting news.
Big. So
it is, and what a gigantic victory.
Yeah, I mean,
it was a Democratic district, but holy cow.
She clobbered the guy.
Yeah, wow. Good.
That
sentiment is still out there.
It turned out rural blacks turned out and voted for her.
Well, that's good. That's the way it's supposed to work. You get to come out and vote and, get representation. It was a Democratic district, as you mentioned, Biden plus 36. But, who really to go out there and say,
she did
we can
better.
Outperform that.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
And she wasn't the only one in New Hampshire.
What?
There was a state house election, and they had it in November, and it was a tie.
3-3. I think those districts are small.
And New Hampshire, well, each, this it's weird. There's 100 people in the House of Delegates in Virginia.
Maybe.
There's 400 in New Hampshire.
I know.
Like
that's
every family has a
everybody in New Hampshire. Some of those people are actually from Vermont, as it turns out. They just
they have to recruit
from
Vermont to get enough people to serve.
Right.
But in that district, it was a tie, so they had to rerun the election.
Bob didn't show.
And a guy named Chuck Grassley, not Chuck Grassley, Chuck Grassley, Democrat,
Matrix glitch, yes.
Won by 12 points.
All right.
Biden plus 5 district. So once again, just like in Virginia, where McClellan did 8 points better than Biden, he did 7 points better than Biden.
All right. This is not don't feel bad, Biden. You're still president.
In Kentucky.
Kentucky. Wow.
Kentucky had a special election. Armstrong, 54 point win for the Democrat, and Biden had a 31-point win. So the Democrat overperformed Biden by 23 points. Huh. So the 2023 specials are still going the Democrats' way.
All right.
My opinion is that at this particular point in time, of course, specials are special. They don't tell you anything about 2024. But so far, Marjorie Taylor Greene's brand of republicanism with a Kevin McCarthy hat on a Marjorie Taylor Greene body. I mean, that's basically what the Republicans are. It's not playing well.
All right.
The Democrats are presenting to the public that Republicans are extremists. It's working, and the public doesn't like it. I'm just saying.
Yeah, well, we have a lot of help in that from the extremist Republicans who won't shut up. So it's all right. They keep saying these crazy things, and people keep, deep sigh, go to the polls, clobber them.
Right. And they also keep saying that special elections don't mean anything and Democrats keep winning, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, that's also the part of the game of special elections is the
Well,
losing side gets to say they don't mean anything. But,
right.
you know, I will point this out. Again, with the McCarthy sitting on a 2-vote margin or whatever it is, I can't even keep track in the House, single digits. If there's a special election sometime, one or two of them during the next Congress, maybe it's not Speaker McCarthy anymore.
Well, you know, with the ascension of Jennifer McClellan from Virginia,
yes,
the great Commonwealth of Virginia, to the House.
It is great.
The House is now at full strength.
All right. That's 435 for a week. What?
Well, David Cicilline from Rhode Island is resigning.
I didn't remember that. I thought we heard. Maybe we heard that. Maybe I didn't. Why? What? When?
Well, the reason is he's going to go work for a nonprofit.
Oh.
But the real reason, I think, is he was actually leadership potential.
Yeah.
But the olds were blocking him, and now the youngs are leapfrogging him, and I just don't think he sees much of a future for himself in the House except the committee level, and he doesn't want to be committee level.
Okay.
That's my gut feeling.
That's a reasonable analysis. Okay, well, when do we have to do that election?
I don't know, but soon enough. But until then, you know, right now, the House is at full strength, and I think McCarthy has something like a 9-point cushion, which isn't really a cushion. Because like Marjorie Trader, what do you call it? Murdery Trader Green, as you refer to her, is actually a traitor.
Yeah.
And she's suggested that maybe what we should do is fight another civil war. But no. Just in the courts, she says. Just in the courts.
Yeah.
We should have a national divorce, she says. And Mitt Romney said, she's crazy. That's crazy. That's insane.
It is. And may I say that we will not be taking custody of Marjorie in this divorce. Just want to let you know. If it happens...
Well, the funny thing is, right, as in all divorces, you think it's simple. Who gets Georgia?
Right, exactly. She says it should be done by blue states and red states. Well, Georgia's a blue state
Georgia's a blue state.
That's right. And we're not taking Marjorie. She's living with her mother. Get out of here. All right. Well, you know, I don't mean to awaken any traumatic memories of divorce for people, but that's why you don't do it frivolously.
No, it's ridiculous. Anyway, more politics. Here's a piece from Axios about what they call South Carolina shadowboxing. Really interesting.
Huh. What?
Because two of South Carolina's most popular Republicans, Nikki Haley and Tim Scott, are both running for president. They're both running from the same state. They're both going after the same voters.
Well, they can't
both
be
have
one
the same
another's vice
message.
presidents.
They both can't win.
Well, yeah, and you really mean that. They probably both can't win, but they certainly can't each win. That's for certain. But, wow, okay. Good old, all eyes were on South Carolina for our next president. I think everybody knows that.
So, our friend Josh Krashour is covering this for Axios. He says, why it matters. If Haley and Scott both run for president, because that's the thing, Axios always has a why it matters thing. If you don't want to read the whole thing, which is only like an inch and a half long, this will give you a quarter of an inch to read.
Yeah. What the hell are we doing here is what it says.
Why it matters. If Haley and Scott both run, they could stunt each other's momentum at a time when the traditional wing of the party can't afford to divide its votes. Both Haley in launching a presidential campaign and Scott in launching a national speaking tour hit on remarkably similar themes. Well, that's because they're going after the same voters.
Yes.
Both optimism, both about their own personal stories. My party can't be racist because look at me. You know, we've seen that. Hello, Herschel Walker. It doesn't always work.
Right. So that's part of why
I won't say
it
doesn't ever work, but it generally doesn't work.
Yeah.
What they're saying, the story of America isn't original sin. It's about redemption. Look at me. But both Haley and Scott's speeches were designed to appeal to traditional conservatives, Mitt Romney conservatives.
Ah.
What New York Times reporter Nate Cohen dubbed revitalized Reaganism, with a focus on small government conservatism and traditional values.
Yeah, sure.
And, you know, the main question on the table is that what Republicans want?
No.
Glenn Dill, a Republican precinct captain from Edisto Island, South Carolina, if that's how it's pronounced.
I think that's right.
said he was looking for a Trump alternative and liked both Haley and Scott, but his wife was a Trump supporter. He said Republicans from his precinct recently held a straw poll, and Trump and DeSantis were running neck and neck, and Scott was in third, and they didn't test Haley.
Yeah.
Because they weren't sure she was really going to run.
Because she's a woman.
But get this.
Maybe, yeah.
The thing that Haley's signature piece was, if you're over 75, you should take a competency test.
Yeah.
Well, this is from Politico. Older voters balk at Nikki Haley's competency test. This may shock you. I can hear you're shocked. That's your shock laugh.
Amazing. Well, yeah.
Older Republicans say they're not opposed to Nikki Haley's call for a new generation of politicians, but when she calls for a mental competency test, some of them feel insulted.
That's amazing. Mostly because they think
Mostly
Donald
because
Trump will
they're
fail
like
it.
75.
But, yeah. But then they say, oh, yeah, me too. I might have to take, well, I'm not running for president. But, yeah, that's annoying. But also Trump would fail one, and that's not good for them. So,
yeah.
All right.
I think
interesting.
In the History of the World, Part 1, there was when Mel Brooks was playing the Palace, and Dom DeLuise, the Emperor, was there.
Yes.
And DeLuise was in character. And Mel Brooks, as a stand-up comic in ancient Rome, made some joke, which wasn't very funny, about being fat. And the next shot was Dom DeLuise with an apple in his mouth, not looking happy.
Right.
In context, it was rather amusing. It was from some years ago when those sort of jokes were allowed to be made. But the fact of the matter is, you got to know who your audience is when you make jokes like that.
Yes.
And I'm not sure Haley knows who actually is the Republican Party.
Yeah, I guess not. Well, I mean, she's calling for
a bunch
different
of old white
makeup
people who don't like being called old white people.
Oh, well,
They
she
don't
might
mind
have
being
looked
called
around
white,
the room.
but they hate being called old.
Too bad for her. Womp womp.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Poor Nikki Haley. Feels so bad.
I want to finish up on that piece because there's some pretty funny lines in there. Right? One person
Nikki Haley for president.
said she was in Manchester, New Hampshire, and said, Richard Ploss, 71, of Exeter, New Hampshire, said, I do like her platform, her plank regarding term limits. I think that's important, but the mental competency test, that's a little over the top. And his 72-year-old wife said, well, we're old. And then they sort of slipped out of the event and they didn't stay for her Q&A.
Yeah. Right. It was dinner time.
That was pretty funny.
4:00.
Some political veterans in the key states said they weren't surprised by these findings. I just feel like the competency test was a gimmick to get attention and one that ultimately could backfire because arguably the largest voting bloc in the Republican Party is older voters.
Yeah, but you don't have to take them, but leave it to them to misunderstand it. They're just insulted on behalf of all old people, and that's fair.
Right.
Okay, well, maybe it wasn't so
great.
They
only want to competency test Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And they should just say that.
Really, you're right. That's the play. They should come right out and say, I said it was about age, but it really isn't. It's about Bernie
about
Sanders
these
and
two
Joe
older
Biden,
candidates
and then they
who
would
I
all
don't
go,
like, and
"Yay,
I want you not to like
I'm
them."
for
That's what
that
it is.
now." Yeah, she could turn that around.
It doesn't involve Donald Trump per se.
Just tell the truth.
Wink, wink.
Right? Yeah, we won't.
But
test
if you want to
him.
vote for me instead of the old guy, that's
He'll
okay.
eat
I mean,
the test.
instead of Donald Trump, that's okay.
Right. We would never be able to test Trump anyway. He would flush the paper down the toilet, chew it up, something like that, and then the records would be gone anyway.
Yeah,
or he'd just
you know.
steal the results and put it
Paper
in Mar-a-Lago.
test results. You see? I
Yeah.
passed.
We got to have electronic results only because otherwise he'll destroy them.
Speaking of a mess,
Yes.
I'm going to get a little bit into the weeds, and since we're doing state politics, because this is sort of interesting from a procedure and policy point of view.
Let's see.
The Democrats want to change the timing for the calendar for when the presidential primary calendar is.
Okay.
This is a problem for them in individual states. They can decide at the national level they want to do this, that, or something else, but in states like New Hampshire, for example, which have a Republican governor and a nominally Republican House of the 4,000 delegates, I think they have a two-person lead for Republican. In other words, the Republicans in individual states may not go along with what the national Democrats want to do.
Right. Okay. Well,
so now you look at a state like Michigan, very important state for Democrats.
We have been looking at
where the Michigan Republican Party has completely collapsed and imploded, and appointed a GOP chair who sounds a little crazier than Kelly Ward and Kari Lake in Arizona.
Yes.
As if to say, oh, if you think crazies and screw looses should go over there, why don't you come here?
We can grow them year-round here in Michigan.
Well, that's a state that has to decide what to do about their primary. And now that there are Democrats running the place, it may be okay on the Democratic side, but what do the Republicans do?
I don't know. What do we have to say about that?
Well, this is what Josh Putnam, who's a political scientist and delegate selection expert, says.
All right.
Okay. Michigan Republicans in 2024, it was a mess before the chair vote.
Yes.
Now, anything that messes up the other side's election process is okay by me. But it's just worth paying attention to the fact, even if you don't go into the details, that they're going to actually have as big a mess as the Republican Party in Michigan looks. It's worse.
Oh.
It's not just that they have nutcases running the place. Structurally, they have issues.
Yeah.
Okay? Michigan Republicans have elected a new chairperson to lead the state party, he says. Add another variable to cauldron already frothing at the brim on a low boil in one of the biggest battlegrounds. Great Lakes state Republicans have answered the question of who will lead them. It's Christina Caramo, who believes in demons. I added the who believes in demons line, but it's true. She does.
Yes. Well,
but that does little because Democrats are demonic, and anybody who wants to vote against a Republican must be demonically inspired.
Yes, obviously.
That does little to answer a number of other questions that hover over the party with respect to Michigan's place in the 2024 Republican presidential nomination process. What do Michigan Republicans do, and how do they approach 2024? National Democrats elevated Michigan into the pre-window period on the 2024 primary calendar for a nomination process that'll see an incumbent president run. And Michigan Democrats, in unified control of state government, complied with the national party's proposed exemption for an early presidential primary, moving the primary with Republicans in the state legislature who were unified in opposition. So against the will of the Republicans, the Democrats moved the primary. Now, the problem with that is by moving the primary forward, you're now against Republican national rules. So if you have a primary sooner than the Republican national rules say you can, they generally dock you delegates. So what happens now
might be good for
is
them.
that if the Republicans follow the law as, run
Michigan
by
law.
the Democrats running the state, they'll lose influence. So what do? I don't think they can turn around and do a caucus. I don't think they can do that in Michigan. So they're sort of stuck. So that's why it's interesting. It's like one of those under the radar, nobody's even looking at it. But I promise you, it is going to be a source of contention, angst, and arguments amongst Republicans, which, by the way, fits the old James Carville line, if your opponents are drowning, throw them an anchor.
Yeah, okay.
Here's an anchor, catch.
Right.
Figure out what you guys are doing with your nomination process.
Wow. Well, that's a wrinkle that I hadn't thought to use. But what an interesting tool, I think wisely put into play there by Democrats. We'll see what Republican National Committee has chance still to say, well, we'll just change our rules in advance of this.
And they're so competent. I mean, they can give them a bye, and that'll probably be what'll have to happen.
But they might say, I was just thinking that there are delegates are likely to be so crazy, maybe depending on who's in charge.
Yeah, they'll love those delegates.
I mean,
they'll probably say, okay, you can have a bye for our rules, and by the way, each one of your delegates gets 3 votes.
It may be, yeah. I don't know. I just don't know who's in charge of that at the RNC, and if it's the right kind of Republican, well, it could go either way. If they're crazy, then they'll say, terrific, can't wait for Michigan to arrive. And if they're one of the curmudgeonly, never Trump people hanging on by their fingernails, then maybe they'll just let things be.
Right. So here's how that went. It's not the Republicans in the Michigan legislature or outside of it oppose an early presidential primary. A Republican introduced legislation in late 2022 to move the Michigan primary into February, and in passing through the Republican-controlled state Senate at the time, all but one member of the caucus backed the change. Now, that bill failed, a casualty of the end of the legislative session, but the Republican support for it then and flipped to opposition now when Democrats want to do it highlight both a Republican desire to hold an earlier presidential primary and a fear of having the RNC levy the super penalty against state Republicans in 2024 as a consequence of going too early.
Super penalty even.
Yeah. But
right.
It's not clear any of this can happen. The Democrats, if they really want to finish moving the primary, have to finish their work before the end of this legislative session. And as we've seen with Congress and legislative sessions, you don't always finish everything you propose that you're going to do.
Yes, but they do have a trifecta, whatever that means.
What if Michigan Republicans determine they don't want to use the primary? What if, despite everything described above, the Michigan Republican Party prefers to use a caucus or a convention?
Yes.
There's no direct opt-out for state parties in Michigan law. Otherwise, state Republicans may have been inclined to opt out of the primary in 2020 when President Trump sought re-election. But that's not available to Michigan. So they don't have that option. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, okay. That's unusual. Maybe they'll invent some options for themselves.
Not only that, again, you step back and look at the bigger picture. They've just put in place people who don't know anything about any of this.
Oh, well, yeah.
We probably know more about the process than they do. And that seems like really a snide thing to say, but in the case of Michigan, it's probably true.
It certainly could be. And I mean, they may have no idea and not be interested in reading the kinds of newspapers that would explain it.
Yeah, exactly.
And just find themselves like, this is there is a fix. Somebody can pass a new rule somewhere and do it pretty quick, but you got to know how to pass rules. And
which rule you want to pass.
All right. They might
and
just
also,
refuse to watch the news until
if you're
too
passing
late.
that rule in Michigan, you got to get support at the national level. And if you're passing that at national level, you have to understand what Michigan wants to do.
Okay.
Is any of that happening right now? I don't think so.
Well, no, I don't know. Ask the demons. See if they'll tell you.
Yeah, I suppose.
Okay. Good luck, by which I mean bad luck, Michigan Republicans.
All right. So here is an actual poll from today where Biden's approval after the State of the Union speech, which was universally accepted as like a good speech by Biden.
Yeah. Okay.
PBS NewsHour Marist poll.
All right.
With NPR. Biden's approval is up to 46, disapprove 46. So it's first time in like 2 years that Biden has been that high.
Okay.
Where his approval matches disapproval. I think he's been at 46 before, but his disapproval was higher. So this is the lowest disapprove he's had in a year.
Okay.
And matches or is just under his highest approval.
Okay. So evenly split there on the two, right? Was it 46 in both?
46 both. 46 approve, 46 disapprove. Even split.
All right.
Okay, so he's got a better than expected midterm outcome, an improving economy, positive coverage of his State of the Union, potential for a showdown among Republicans for the presidential nominee.
Went to
But
Ukraine.
it remains to be seen how sustainable these things are.
Right.
Interestingly, among Republicans and like-minded independents, 42% said they want the GOP to nominate Trump, which is up from 35%.
Oh,
But the majority of the core vote is 54% want somebody else.
oh, okay. I see.
So
Still,
that may or may not make any difference, just like it doesn't make any difference that a lot of people think that Biden shouldn't run and he's too old.
right.
You know, that's an abstract. When you match him against a particular person, things change. And on the Republican side, things may not change, but when you split the anti-Trump vote, you get Trump ahead.
Right. Mental competency test. What?
You know, so
And then
all
they
of
end up
that
with
is
Trump.
sort of interest. And I mentioned
How
that
funny
in
is
the
that?
context of Natalie Jackson having a no paywall article in the National Journal.
Oh,
Myths about Biden's electoral strength could spell trouble in 2024. Democrats need to remember that 2020 was a nail-biter. 2022 isn't replicable necessarily, and concerns over Biden's age will only grow. That's because he's only getting older.
time is linear.
And time
We
is, well,
think.
for us.
Yes. Right. Relative to.
Right?
All right. Never mind.
Not for the aliens, but for us.
Yes. Okay. Aliens can't vote
Right. So
yet.
concern about age-based decline is based on the fact that humans decline as they age. Polls from
Revise,
University of
please.
Massachusetts Amherst show broad public support for the concept of age limits for elected politicians. Questioning whether somebody is still able to do one of the most difficult jobs on the planet if reelected at 82, an age in which many people struggle to function, and an age none of my grandparents even reached, seems like a reasonable question. I have to say, though, going to Kyiv
Yeah.
and having ice cream and, you know, all that sort of stuff,
Yes.
you know, answers that question a lot.
I mean, it's an age at which many people struggle to function. It's also an age at which many other people don't struggle at all, and they won't for 10 to 15 years because it's the way it is.
What she's reacting to is specific.
It's weird.
The New York Times published Ezra Klein's op-ed making the case for Biden in a morning newsletter from David Leonhardt, implying Biden is the only electable Democrat on the national scene. A record scratch in my head when I read the passage 4 paragraphs into Ezra Klein's piece. Biden proved and keeps proving doubters like me wrong. He won the Democratic primary, even though voters had no shortage of fresher faces. He won the general election handily. And Natalie Jackson says, yes, he won the overall popular vote by more than 7 million votes, but the Electoral College made it closer.
Well, yes.
And that's not winning handily or showing unusual electoral strength. A 7 million vote win could be called close in any way is a different matter, but that's the system we have. And additionally, the 2022 election results have been overestimated as an indicator of strength for Biden and Democrats heading into 2024. I tell you this looking backwards at yesterday, where special elections tell us the same thing, but keep that in mind. It is true that Democrats minimized losses and gained a seat in the Senate, an excellent outcome for the party in power in the midterm, but the conditions that led to that outcome could be extremely difficult to recreate.
It's difficult to recreate.
Democrats held on to the Senate largely due to Republicans nominating objectively weak candidates. That's going to continue. Abortion was unusually important following the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, a once in 50 years event. That's going to continue.
I'm going to say that that's going to happen twice in 50 years.
Yeah. You know, just look at the election yesterday in Wisconsin. It still matters.
Yes.
And as far as crazy candidates, you know, Carrie Lake may well wind up, and what's his name, Blake Masters, one of those may still wind up running in Arizona. You know, they still have nutcases out there. And look at the Michigan GOP.
It's not like they haven't been
she says
Todd
it's
Akening
unclear
for a
whether
while.
abortion will remain the top vote driver in 2024. So far, the Republicans are doing everything in their power to make it so.
That's true.
So we shall see.
It's
Biden
unclear,
looks
though.
likely to run, and he certainly could win a second term. No question about that. But selective memory and interpretation of his electoral strength is not what will get him across the line, nor does it help when the media takes on a cheerleader role rather than looking at facts. Attention to real vulnerabilities and national conditions as they unfold, yes, including Biden's age and Haley's accurate point that our government is still overwhelmingly run by boomers, which, by the way, it's not. Boomers are now like slightly under Gen X in terms of like who's in government,
so her
is what will
accurate point
motivate
that
the
is
base to
inaccurate.
turn out and persuade swing voters. So, look, she's right in the general sense that you can't look at the environment and say, clearly this favors Democrats. What you can say is Democrats are going to be way stronger than people think, and they have a really good shot. It's the same thing we said about 2022. They have a really good shot at winning.
Yes.
They do.
Yeah.
They did.
I don't know what
That's not the same thing as, okay, we win.
is.
Of course
No.
we haven't won
And no
yet.
one
It's
says
too
that.
early. And nobody's
Believe
saying
me,
that.
you can't find any Democrats who say you got a lock on anything, even when you do.
There is no lock. We're Democrats. We never
Right.
have a lock on anything.
They never
we
say
think we're losing even when we're winning. I'm just not worried about that.
It's just, I mean, I understand the point that we're getting around to, which is, hey, you just can't tell. And, okay, I mean, older candidate, yeah, sure. But to finish the point, you really have to make some counterintuitive claims about what we're seeing about the way the abortion issue, for instance, is being used. I mean, there's no stopping these Republicans. Everybody, I mean, there's 2 years of campaigning or more still left in watching more progressive Democrats insisting, hey, by the way, all of you who lean a little bit more moderate, who said, that's not really the Republicans aren't going to go crazy with this thing, and they're not going to try to ban contraception generally or anything like that. And, they keep piling up the evidence, and somebody's going to say, your analysis of how this issue is going to run isn't that good, actually. Maybe you don't know what is coming next. I mean, no one does for sure, but the idea that it was going to go away is, I think, pretty ridiculous, and I think I think you have the data for that. So, I don't know. That's kind of odd. Seems like a strained point. It's a good point, but just make it and say it's not the strongest point in the world right now, but it's something to keep an eye on. Sure, fine. You don't have to make things up.
It's 2023. Keep in mind, we don't even know who's running in 2024.
Right. And I'm not even going to do it. And there's 17 people from South Carolina and all 4,000 delegates to the
and I'm not sure that I would pass the
New
Nikki
Hampshire
Haley test, so I don't know that I'm running.
Right. That was.
I'm not 75, and I won't be 75.
So you
I'm not saying ever, but I won't be 75 in 2024 when it's time to run. And I'm not running, so I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that would be pretty amazing, by the way, if Nikki Haley's ploy on the competency test sank her such that she's eliminated from the contest. Trump gets nominated, who's the one who should really be taking this competency test, and he probably will could coast to victory by attacking her over the competency test thing by screaming not only that it was unnecessary, but he would pass it with flying colors.
Yes,
and
and so would all of the seniors who are voting for me.
Right, exactly. I mean, and he'll just say that, and people will cheer for it, and they might nominate him.
The only competency test is whether seniors vote for me or her.
Us. Yeah, right. That's basically, it's easy enough. And actually a good line. You should tell him that one. And thanks, he just sunk the country. That's terrific. But it's true. I believe he can just push her straight out of the race with that. What a weird thing.
Mm. So let's turn, because Biden was there, had ice cream and left, to Ukraine. It is, after all, the anniversary of the war starting. So worth a little bit of looking. I mean, this is David Rothkopf writing this morning in the Daily Beast. It's behind a paywall, but won't be in a couple of days. That's the way they do it. They paywall stuff for 48 hours, and then you can go read it. 10 surprising lessons of the Ukraine war so far, from revealing Putin's weaknesses to new ways to wage war to intriguing new power centers. The war in Ukraine has served up one surprise after another, and we can expect more. And this is going to spark a really interesting debate as to how much support the U.S. should give Ukraine, in the sense that what does the U.S. really want? That's going to get at a Julie Ioffe piece she has in Puck about that. Does the U.S. want Ukraine to win? Do they want Ukraine to take Crimea?
Oh, well, that's
a really interesting question that hasn't been settled yet. But back to David Rothkopf and the points he is trying to make. While Ukraine has pleaded for fighter jets, it turns out unmanned aircraft have stolen the show. No Time for Sergeants was once a TV hit in America. I remember that. I remember the original movie with Andy Griffith. That's how old I am.
Wow.
It has been a flop for the Republican Army, for the Russian Army.
That's the same thing.
There's a
right.
Freudian slip.
Yeah.
Because the Russian Army really doesn't have non-commissioned officers, at least effective on the field. It's been a huge vulnerability. It's been exposed.
Okay.
Right? He makes the point, you know what? Maybe it's time for navies to realize their time will soon be up. When the Russian Navy's Black Sea flagship, the Moskva, was sunk, a combination of U.S.-supplied intel and Ukrainian-made Neptune anti-ship missiles revealed how vulnerable warships are to new technologies. Mm-hmm. So this is part of the old debate, which is a current debate. Are aircraft carriers going to go the way of the battleship?
Okay.
It doesn't mean it's over for navies. It just means they'll have to change and adapt to new battle space realities. And that means when you have a multi-billion battleship / carrier group proposed by Republicans to make America great again, is that what you really want? Of course, MAGA people are now saying, well, it's too expensive. Cut the military. So they're splitting themselves on that. But, it's part of that bigger debate you'll see a lot more about. Poland is the new Germany. They're the ones taking the lead. Oh. Germany is so divided
new Germany.
That, once seen as Europe's unquestioned leader, not anymore.
Well, that's interesting. And in stark contrast to the old 1930s slogan, Poland is now Germany.
Yeah.
Which is a problem. But okay, congratulations then, Poland, on that. And the pączki, which we appreciate. Oh, I wonder if Biden had any while he was there. Probably, right? I mean, okay.
Who knows? Vladimir Putin may be a madman, says Rothkopf, but at least he has the common sense not to want to be obliterated in an actual nuclear war with NATO.
We think, yes.
Putin couldn't handle the Ukrainian military. Surely he knows that confronting NATO on the battlefield would be an epic catastrophe for him. And speaking of Putin, stick a fork in him. He may not be quite done yet, but he will be soon. And besides, if anybody deserves to have a fork stuck in him, it's Putin.
All right. Yeah, I guess I could get behind that. A polonium fork would be a good idea.
Right. But he makes the point, and people have made this point as well. This is an existential war for Putin because he can't afford to lose it. If he loses the war, he's out. He's done. He's finished.
Yeah,
so that's why he's sticking around doing stuff, even though it's not working.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you want to. I'm trying to decide whether that needs to be viewed differently, like say through a mafia type lens. Can he afford to? I mean, that's also a setting in which you're not supposed to lose your wars. You really shouldn't be losing your wars anywhere if you can help it.
Right. So he uses TikTok as a reference to like all social media here, but he says TikTok's more than just an annoying teenage time waster and Chinese espionage plot. Yeah. Ukraine's masterful use of social media.
Oh, yeah.
With the little Shibas, with the little dogs.
Mm-hmm. Oh, have they been
the
doing
fellows, NAFO, has played a major role in shaping global public opinion about the war. In fact, TikTok and similar platforms have played such an important role. Early on, observers began referring to this new element of conflict as the TikTok war.
The Chinese have to be happy about that.
Now, the point he makes, Ukraine's already in the EU and NATO, whether you like it or not.
Oh.
It's just done.
But, not technically.
No NATO member has ever received more assistance from NATO during a conflict than Ukraine, for example.
Okay. I
mean,
mean,
Ukraine said it wants to join the EU within 2 years, and that's ambitious, but with the EU likely to have to pick up the lion's share of the massive tab to rebuild Ukraine, Europe's vested interest in the battered country is only likely to get bigger, not smaller.
That's true, certainly, I think. Yeah, that sounds like a good point. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what
they may not want Ukraine, but they have to have Ukraine because they have an investment.
They have to take responsibility for Ukraine.
That's the point he's making.
Okay.
And then he says, with friends like Turkey, Israel, the global south, and Elon Musk, who needs enemies?
I guess. Yeah.
The support of NATO for Ukraine has been a huge story, but another has been the fact that many countries worldwide have sought to stay out of the fight, and that's been frustrating for the U.S., and it's especially uncomfortable with special relationship allies like Israel. Meanwhile, NATO ally Turkey has dragged its feet, and even entrepreneurs who depend on the U.S. for big bucks like Elon Musk have pirated Russian party lines and started to block access to key technologies.
Yes.
So, who's on whose side gets to be pretty clear.
Yeah, well, I guess where there's money in play.
Right. And the most important lesson of all Russia being Russia, as it will be for the remainder of this century, everything is going to be about China. Whereas Ron DeSantis and in parroting Donald Trump likes to say it's about China.
Wow. Does he try to say it that way too now?
He tried to say it on Staten Island when he came to visit the other day.
It's actually quite dumb, and I don't know whether did he think that was local dialect?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
so,
I remind you, he eats pizza
whereas
with a
support
fork.
for Ukraine would be a profound mistake for Beijing, nonetheless, people do things. And there's been other so-called surprises, although in retrospect, perhaps they shouldn't have been. The U.S. has had a sharp reminder our weapons production capacity isn't what it needs to be if we need to ramp up quickly for a major conflict. That means investment. That means technology. That means infrastructure. That means people feeding at the trough. That means not cutting the defense budget.
Yeah, especially not. Well, the Navy is protected. I learned that from Joan the other day. Rick Scott says the Navy Navy sunsetting is off the table.
We'll go back to our discussion about aircraft carrier battle groups and their place in third generation, 21st century conflict. Fifth generation, I guess.
Fifth. Oh my gosh. Well, yeah. I don't know why the Navy got special protection, but that might explain it. They're sinking.
Oh, also Medicare and Social Security now get special protection.
Yes, right. He chose those two because that's what he was getting beaten up on. Why he threw the Navy alone in there, I'm not entirely sure. I still can't figure that one out, but who cares? It's Rick Scott, and he's not only has now Tim Scott and Nikki Haley running against one another from the same state, but somebody else with his name is running for president too. So Rick Scott, Tim Scott will split the Scott vote. It's a real mess over there. Good.
One more big surprise as we get ready for the end of the show for today. The degree to which the best intelligence services in the world overestimated Putin and the Russian military. Which suggests in months ahead, if this war remains true to form, we should prepare ourselves for many more twists and unanticipated turns.
Yes. Okay. They really screwed that one up. That's good news, and I guess that means he can't run a superpower as
But
a
in short,
mafia boss.
our people are worried that if Ukraine wins and takes Crimea, Putin might actually use a tactical nuclear weapon, which would pull us in. That's the worry. That's what we'll have to watch. More about that tomorrow.
Maybe. Okay. Well, definitely about it tomorrow. Very good. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, where to next? I think I had some other... I might have had some other emails tagged for discussion. Yeah, sure. Let's see. This, I guess, might help us make the segue back to Michigan, because there are things to say and listen to about Michigan. And what have we here? Oh, yes, right. Just a reaction email here from Jeremy Freiberger, who sends along this response saying, while listening to your commentary yesterday, which I guess is now Monday, with respect to the Michigan Republican Party, the Michigan Gop, as we like to say, I couldn't help but think of the face-eating leopards party whenever a Michigan, quote, moderate Republican was quoted. Basically, seeing the story behind the story, I never thought that my long-running past support of the face-eating leopards party would result in a leopard eating my face, and so it has gone. That does sound like the right reaction to what's going on there, and the leopards are eating faces with relish, like not actual pickle relish, but, with great relish, which, no pickle relish can truly be great, I would contend. I don't know. It was just a throwaway line. Love the pickles. Don't need to hear from the pickle lobby about that one. Everybody knows there's a huge pickle lobby listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show. We love the relish. Okay, so speaking of Michigan, as we were, there is a lot to share. And maybe we'll say... both of the things that we should share about Michigan have come to the attention of and come to me eventually via Rosalyn MacGregor, who's stuck there on the ground in Michigan. Maybe loves it, perhaps lifetime resident, I don't know, but certainly dismaying for certain pockets of Michigan which are really in some serious trouble. Let's see. So first of all, I guess here's what we'll do. We'll roll her latest report, which follows on the heels of our mention over the last couple of days of Hillsdale County, where we were talking about the improbably named John Smith, I think his name was, taking over as, and I think to be perfectly clear about it, as my recollection is that he perhaps won the chairmanship of the Republican organization for that congressional district, as opposed to the Hillsdale County Republican Party chair. A lot of states, maybe not all of them. I think we have that around here too. There are different and overlapping localized organizations. So like, for instance, here in Loudoun County, there would be a Loudoun County Party organization, and I think you find it in both parties, but also a 10th Congressional District Party organization as well, which happens to include, I think all of Loudoun is in the 10th district, but sometimes the districts or counties get split in drawing the district lines. So sometimes they overlap entirely. But I guess the congressional district ones tend to be larger than a single county. So they're, I guess, slightly, a larger constituency and I don't know whether it depends on the structure of the state party as to whether or not that would be considered a more important position. But we just heard about that guy winning over the congressional district party organization in the Hillsdale area, and having done so by posting armed guards at the door of the election, the balloting for the chairmanship, and turning away moderates and purging moderates from the party ranks in order to win. At the same time, we have the actual Hillsdale County Republican chair is a bit of a problem as well. And Rosalyn explains that in this pre-recorded segment.
Good morning, David. I have for you today a piece about a leader in Hillsdale County, Michigan, to give everyone an idea of the sort of people who live in that rural part of the state. For those who don't know, there's Hillsdale College and the city of Hillsdale, all inside Hillsdale County, Michigan. The name Hillsdale might have become familiar to Kagro and the Morning listeners, yes, because of Florida Governor DeSantos' takeover of New College of Florida to shape it into Hillsdale College's image.
Right.
I'm quoting from an article in the Hillsdale Daily News. A video has surfaced of a prominent Hillsdale attorney wearing what appears to be a Nazi symbol. Darren Wisely reportedly shared the video in his Snapchat account. It depicts him filming himself and a skull pin on his shirt lapel that some say is a Totenkopf, a symbol of the Nazi SS. In the mirrored image, common with Snapchat when using a front-facing camera, a skull and crossbones lapel pin closely resembling the Totenkopf is clearly visible on the lapel of Wisely's jacket. The Anti-Defamation League Center on Extremism reviewed the image and confirmed it to be a Totenkopf, a Nazi, quote, death head, unquote. The Totenkopf was resurrected post-World War II by white supremacist organizations in America as a symbol because of its importance to the SS, according to the Anti-Defamation League. Wisely, a former assistant prosecutor in Hillsdale County, texted a statement to the Hillsdale Daily News. Quote, "Then, of course, there are those that simply want to smear me," Wisely stated. "I will never bend the knee to the PC mob or bow to the thought police. They can say or do whatever. I really don't care. I'm going to preserve the truth so it's not lost for the next generation, even if I'm the last man on earth doing so, and nothing they say will stop me," unquote. Wisely's name first appeared on the local political scene when he announced his candidacy for the 58th District State Representative seat in 2020. Andrew Fink won that election. Wisely then was named chair of the Hillsdale County Republican Executive Committee and served until November of 2022 when he stepped down in the midst of a growing rift between the America First Republicans and the Leninger faction of the Hillsdale County Republican Party. In the article, the regional director of the Michigan Anti-Defamation League was very charitable. She said, quote, "It may be that this guy mistook it. It could be that Wisely is ignorant of what this symbol represents," unquote. She added, "It's important for political leaders at all levels, local to federal, to take serious and significant steps to prevent and address extremists in government." Quote, "It is imperative that both liberal and conservative voices come together to ward off a common threat. Every American who believes in democracy, the rule of law, and civil rights, regardless of their political affiliation, must remain vigilant," unquote. The scariest thing to me when I first read this article was that a real live fascist was working as an assistant county prosecutor. My hair starts to smoke when I think about the Christian nationalists graduating each year from Hillsdale College, paired with fascist leaders in the county. My hope is that the classical liberal education get at Hillsdale College does turn them into questioning, rational beings. My fear is that's probably hard to do at a faith-based institution. That brings us to the end of my time for today. I wanted to share a glimpse at the type of people Ron DeSantis is hoping to create with the makeover of the new College of Florida. Remember, support David and his work to make this wonderful live broadcast and taped podcast. This is Rosalyn MacGregor, your Michigan correspondent, signing off. Back to you, David.
All right. And yes, I remind you to support me. It comes out funny when it's done that way, but so I appreciate the plug for other people to do it. And by the way, in addition to taping pre-recorded segments, I would encourage you to remember, if you're a podcast listener, you hear daily pitches for whether it's for financial support of the program or encouraging you to submit your own pre-recorded segments, or to support us on social media of various kinds, and the clever slogans that go along with it, like in Scott's promo. You're invited to do the same for that too. I mean, if that interest strikes you, the more such promos I have in the mix, the less boring I guess it gets. And it's always exciting to hear from another member of the audience in a different voice, and to be able to throw those into the podcast is a great thing, and helps us change up the lineup a little bit and shake things up a little, which we still need to do for my own pitch for pre-recorded segments, which is probably going on like 5 years old. And I think it starts with, well, let's change things up a little bit. And how about we change that up? It's a chore. And if you want to take it on, I would appreciate it. Okay, so in addition to her report for the day, Rosalyn also forwarded, and somebody else, I think, I don't know whether they forwarded it to me and I put it away in pocket, or I just saw it go by on Mastodon and put it in pocket, but our eyes landed on the same Politico piece here. What it looks like when the far right takes control of local government. And this is based in I guess one of the same corners of Michigan, or the same corner perhaps of Michigan. Subheader says here, just don't call them Christian nationalists. Although I suspect that if they're objecting to that, it's probably only temporary, and they'll get comfortable with it and rejoice in the term at some point. Now, this is a different county, not Hillsdale, and I don't know whether they're nearby one another or not, and maybe we'll look at the map on that. But I'm trying to think. This is a county that Rosalyn has mentioned before in her updates, and now I'm trying to think of it. It's spelled like the city in Canada, Ottawa County, and now I'm thinking, is there a different pronunciation of it? That I guess it's been a week or two since I heard her pre-recorded segment, and now I can't remember whether it had its own pronunciation. I know Joan reminded me yesterday, speaking of East Palestine, Ohio, where the train accident was. But that much let's see. By the way, I wanted to take a look on the map of where Ottawa. I mean, I can't think of how else you would pronounce it, but they always, come up with something. And let's see, Hillsdale County. let's see, Hillsdale County, Michigan as well. Let me see. I'll draw the map here. So they're not far. They're in the same corner of the state. Well, not really. I guess when you zoom back out. I mean, it wasn't too far away, but it's like 3 hours drive when you really zoom back out of there. And it looks like Ottawa County, right on Lake Michigan. So sort of the western portion of central Michigan, I guess, going north to south, whereas Hillsdale County seems to be located more to the southeast of Michigan, just sort of north of the Ohio line. So if you were to go due south from Hillsdale, you'd run into Ohio. Due south from Ottawa County, you'd run into Indiana. So they're not that close, I guess. But both, I guess you could say, I guess if you're grouping the two of them together and looking at the state in totality, it's certainly both southerly and, I guess they're sort of southwest-ish. Certainly southwest of Detroit for Hillsdale. All right. I think we get the picture. And you too can get the picture by looking at what they call maps or cracking a book and figuring out where places are. So you don't have to depend on me for that. Anyway, the story, right? What it looks like when the far right takes control of local government. And we thought we knew what it looked like when at least the far right took control of local parties. That we learned about in Hillsdale. It looks like posting armed guards at the door of party elections and keeping the other side, whatever they may be, out of the election and then taking power that way. But this, you'll recognize some of it, I think, when we start talking about it from Rosalyn's discussions and her reporting about it a few weeks ago. It's like you got the news early here on Kagro in the Morning. David Siders writes this piece for Politico, and I guess it's the Politico magazine. Yeah. And it starts this way. In West Olive, Michigan, and I suppose that's pronounced as Olive as well. Who knows? People pronounce things weird. Could be Olive for all I know. But at any rate, the agenda for the Ottawa County Governing Board's most recent meeting here late last week, listed among other issues a roof repair and resurfacing contract. That's not actually bad. That's, routine business. And the idea is that there's a contrast here, right? They had the roof repair and resurfacing contract, a budget calendar that needed setting, and from IT, a request to hire one more employee. They were terrestrial concerns. But over the course of a meeting that ran more than 4 hours, public speaker after public speaker in 3-minute increments were debating something else entirely, something far more spiritual. To what extent their government should or should not pursue Judeo-Christian values. And hat tip there for including the Judeo for probably the last time with these Christian nationalists as they begin to abandon the Judeo mask that they put on these things. As snow dusted the streets outside the county building in this conservative, deeply religious swath of western Michigan, could have just read the story, lots of people spoke in favor. They warned of the tyranny of mask mandates. They haven't gotten a new box yet lately. There's, the candidate in a box. It's the supply chain issues with that, and they can't get enough boxes, so they can't ship anymore. So they're still screaming about the tyranny of mask mandates. There probably hasn't been a mask mandate, probably in Ottawa County in quite some time, I would guess, but okay. Also, of course, the latest hot issues that came in the last box, sexualization of our children and the unhinged, caterwauling fascists of the left. One woman thanked the commissioners, quote, for trying to bring our freedom back, while a man read to them from Isaiah, "Be not dismayed, for I am your God." I think he meant someone else is your God, and he was just quoting that God. Anyway, I will uphold you with my righteous hand. It wasn't the speaker who thought he was God, although I'm not certain that that's really, you know what? Who knows? Could be anything. All right, let's scroll. It's 20 minutes to scroll past this gigantic picture that illustrates the piece here. It's been going like this in Ottawa County since last month after an upstart band of far-right Republicans unseated 7 more traditionalist Republican incumbents, seizing majority on the 11-member board. The hardliners, members of a group called Ottawa Impact, had signed a contract with Ottawa. Oh boy. Well, I mean, there you go. They just got their candidate in a box from the 1990s. Finally arrived. Contract with Ottawa, promising to respect the values and faith of the people of Ottawa County and to secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and future generations, because most people don't know what posterity means, so they decided to look it up and then switch it when they were lifting language from the Constitution. They pledged to recognize our nation's Judeo-Christian heritage and celebrate America as an exceptional nation blessed by God. At candidate forums inside a Baptist church not far from county offices here, they talked about their faith. So, since I have to scroll again in order to get to the rest of the story, here I can say I definitely remember Rosalyn's mention of the outcome on these board elections and the Ottawa Impact group. So this is, I guess, we'll consider it to be the follow-up to Rosalyn's reporting on KITM. Roger Bergman, the sole incumbent Republican commissioner the group failed to oust, had attended one of those forums last year, and as he sat in the audience, he grew concerned. But even Bergman, who at 76, should have to take a mental competency test apparently, has decades in local politics, wasn't sure what it would all mean when it came time for a new far-right majority to actually govern. And the answer is they do dumb stuff and probably dropped the ball here and there. That is, until they took office last month and havoc broke out. In their first meeting, the new board members adopted a series of measures that changed things in Ottawa County. They fired the county administrator and replaced him with John Gibbs, a former Trump administration official, Christian missionary, failed congressional candidate, and election denier, all rolled up in one, who once suggested women should not have the right to vote. They ran out their corporate council. They closed the county's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. They picked for their new public health officer, pending state approval, a safety manager at an HVAC service company who, during the COVID pandemic, suggested ivermectin and neti pots instead of social distancing and masks. And they rewrote the county motto as well. Let's go see what that's about. And by the way, I can't fault the advocacy of neti pots, but I wouldn't suggest that they're good for fighting COVID. I think they're good for their own reasons, but that's interesting. A little bit of overlap there. I wouldn't run for office based on it, and really, generally speaking, I don't want to talk about it at all because yuck. But anyway, no longer was Ottawa County where you belong, or rather, where you belong. Remember this? This was definitely in Rosalyn's report, but rather, where freedom rings. The implication being it will ring in your ears so loudly that you people who are perhaps gender nonconforming or maybe who don't think socialism is yucky and gross will cover your ears and run away and move to another county. Oh my God, Bergman said when we met last week after a commission meeting where a young man in a hoodie, Camden Hembrough, thanked the board majority for standing against, quote, forces of darkness. And that definitely deserves, well, maybe it even, forces of darkness probably deserves the horror dramatic in the minor key. Anyway, Bergman said, it's becoming more and more evident that these people are Christian nationalists. Well, yes, and they are, of course, more and more open about saying so. Nationally, the most Trumpian right wing of the Republican Party has been a disaster for the Gop in November, and by the way, in all special elections since, with hardliners losing in competitive states like Pennsylvania and Arizona and underperforming in House races elsewhere. Those candidates' inability to attract moderate Republicans and independents was the big reason the midterms defied expectations, resulting in a less than red wave year, or a red less than wave, I would say. But okay. In Michigan, a swing state, it was the same story, and it swung all the way Democratic, didn't it? Democrats not only held on to the governorship, but flipped the state legislature, gaining full control of state government for the first time in 40 years. You really can't argue with that. But if the Gop paid a price elsewhere for its rightward drift, it didn't here in a county that Donald Trump carried by more than 20 percentage points in 2020. In this predominantly white county of about 300,000 people, or the entire population of Iceland, by the way, the entire election last year was functionally over after the primary. What remained was an object lesson in what happens when the far right runs the enterprise. It's still government, maybe, sort of. I mean, people still think Russia's got a government. But its meetings can look a lot more like a cross between a MAGA rally warm-up act and a Christian revival. On the day I visited last week, Ken Schwalier, an apple grower, went to the microphone to thank the new board for, quote, reversing what he called, quote, a long trend in our country falling away from our constitutional past. Sure, it's true because I feel like it's true, so I'll just say it. You don't need any evidence to say dumb stuff like that. We're part of something new, he told the commissioners. It's a grassroots effort that I'm glad to see here. We don't see it in very many places, but I hope it starts here and grows across the country. Whatever it is. Bergman sat through the meeting, his gaze fixed on the lectern and his left hand on his chin. He considers himself plenty Christian. A former mayor of the county seat, Grand Haven, on the eastern shore of Lake Michigan, he'd helped to start a church himself. On his biography on the county website, he'd counted his own blessings from God. This, he said, was different. I asked him how exactly, and the answer is they want to slaughter people in the name of Christianity. But let's see what his explanation for it is. I asked him how. Earlier this month, the Public Religion Research Institute, we hear from them through Greg all the time, PRRI, and Brookings Institution had estimated, based on a recent survey, which he probably told us about, that more than half of Republicans nationally either sympathized with or adhered to the views of Christian nationalism, a worldview shaped by the fusion of Christian messaging and American identity. It wasn't exactly hiding in the corners of American public life. When the words came to Bergman the next day, he texted me, the phrase I was looking for yesterday, he said, was, they have chosen to weaponize Christianity. Oh, an interesting turn of the phrase. Literally a turn of the phrase. Well, literally a turn, but not literally a phrase. Weaponize is one word. But okay, you get the idea. For anyone who's endured a county government meeting, boy, I feel sorry for you, or flipped past one on public access TV, it may not strike you as the likeliest place for a spiritual crusade. It's because it would be wholly inappropriate to have one there because of our separation of church and state, but to hell with that. It wasn't in Ottawa County either before COVID. When I met with Doug, Tjapkes, maybe? Tjapkes, a former news person who once owned a local radio station, at the church where he plays organ every Sunday, he told me that for years he'd tried to hook his listeners on county government, and no matter what I said or did or editorialized, I couldn't get much interest. Yeah, I can see that. But public health mandates related to the pandemic infuriated a group of parents who complained and litigated, unsuccessfully, about government overreach in schools. They formed Ottawa Impact, recruiting a slate of candidates to run against the commission's Republican incumbents, and they broadened their concerns from public health to a wholesale overhaul of how the country was being run. Country. Yes, but this says county, but they probably mean country as well. At one forum last year at the Lighthouse Baptist Church in Holland, Sylvia Rodea, R-H-O-D-E-A, a co-founder of Ottawa Impact and now vice chair of the county commission, described the election as one that, quote, will decide whether we are going to save America, and that starts local. America, she said, it's locally, but okay. America, she said, is a place of opportunity built on the Constitution, Christianity, and capitalism. That's a lot of alliteration there, big C's, I guess. Constitution, Christianity, and capitalism. The Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, she said, was promoting woke ideology. So yes, they received that candidate box for sure. Joe Moss, the group's other co-founder and now chair of the commission, said, "There is a mighty force at our back." That was very dramatic. Mighty force at our back. "And everything that we do, we are doing for the glory of God." Never mind, decently running the local government. That's not Christian nationalism. John DeBlay, a member of the local Republican Party's executive board, told me following the board meeting last week. "It's just everyday family people who value our faith, our family, and our freedom." More alliteration in order to duck from the part where, we run it as Christian and we're nationalists. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I don't know, that sounded like a good time for a dramatic pause. Heading back to Politico and their magazine article, what it looks like when the far right takes control of local government. Note for the record that what it looks like to, A, the outside observer, B, maybe somebody who's used to the separation of church and state, you'll see things differently. But from the inside, or at least when you're being asked by reporters whether you're Christian nationalists, you end up saying, no, we're definitely not any of that. But we run things as Christians, and our outlook, our worldview is nationalist. For instance, we are a local organization who have organized in order to elect ourselves to the county board. But everything is, yada, yada, our interpretation of the Constitution. And, you should always have an eye on the Constitution no matter what level of government you're working in. But, your real first priority really ought to be the governance of and the governing documents of the county and the state that you're in. But the fact that everything is, we have to get back to our founders' ideals about the Constitution. Well, that's because you're nationalist. And if you're Christians and nationalists, you're probably Christian nationalists, especially if you believe that religion should have a central role in the governance of the county, the state, and the country, and indeed the world. You should just admit to it already. But here's what it looks like when the far right takes control of government, and you're part of that far right. It looks to you like he described it, like this guy, what was his name? John DeBlay, it's D-E, capital D-E, capital B-L-A-A-Y, Maybe it's just anglicized John DeBlay. Maybe it's got some sort of foreign pronunciation. I don't know. But here's what it looks like. What does it look like when you take over? Well, from the inside, it looks like, quote, everyday family people who just, we just all value our faith, our family, and our freedom. That's very slogany, of course. But, you value your faith? Fine, sure. I value your family, or you value your own family. Remember, we're everyday family people. Of course you're going to value your family. And one more thing, our freedom. And who can argue with freedom? Well, you can argue with it if, for instance, your idea of freedom is actually tyranny. And, we might want to have a discussion about that. You won't believe it, but, well, you're wrong and I'm right. And that's the point of the show. That's why I do one. Anyway, you see where we're going with this. Well, anyway, he says, because he's not a Christian nationalist, for the first time in my life, I could honestly tell you it's like a good versus evil fight that's going on in the world right now. And that's not Christian nationalist at all, except, to the extent that it defines Christian nationalism. The fallout has seemingly come from everywhere. In an email to the board, the county's outgoing attorney warned that firings of multiple senior county officials would jeopardize the county's bond rating, saying stable counties don't fire their corporation counsel, and administrator. And while that's probably true, changes sometimes do get made, I'm sure. But yeah, the fiscal responsibility pitch won't appeal to them because they're not Republicans, they're Christian nationalists. And besides which, Republicans were never really for fiscal responsibility anyway, so it was an ill fit to begin with. The county's top health official, Adeline Hambley, is suing members of the board. And in a letter to the county last week, Dana Nessel, the state's Democratic Attorney General, said she had reviewed dozens of complaints about the board's behavior at its first meeting in January, in part related to whether board members had made personnel decisions before being seated, that is to say, behind closed doors, when they, A, didn't have the legal authority to make those decisions, and B, made them contrary to law, that is to say, without doing it in front of the public, because there was no public forum for them to meet in because they weren't members of the board yet. But okay. She said the alleged conduct of certain commissioners is the antithesis of transparency and good governance. In the Holland Sentinel, it's been headline after headline, like, Christian nationalism is gripping the nation. Has it arrived in Ottawa County? Sure, of course it has. Or Ottawa County's prospective health officer has no experience. Here's why that could be a problem, which, again, I think is inherent in the setup. And then there are the hours-long public comment sessions at the board's regular meetings, which could be, by the way, part of the tactic of it, right? I don't know whether they planned it or whether they have thought it through to that level, but if participating in public governance means having to sit through hours and hours and hours of total lunacy from public comment, it could definitely, normal people will be like, I'm not getting involved in that. I can't take it. I'll fall asleep. I'll kill myself listening to that crap over and over again. But, you might think, well, the board has to sit there through it too. But that's like listening to cheerleaders for them. That's people coming and reaffirming their worldview for 3 hours. It's addicting, like watching Fox News, I would imagine. But, I don't know whether that was the plan, but that's the way it's going to kind of work out. So, right, then there are the hours-long public comment sessions at the board's regular meetings. There are supporters and there are critics, people who call board members fascist or troglodytic. I guess they're troglodytes. They're troglodyte-like. I guess that's the word. Would you say troglodytic? Okay. That's a quote with a link and everything. Right now, I'm looking at the face of a theocracy, one man said to them last week. Karen Obitz, a Democrat who said she has supported traditionalist Republicans in the past, told me she was struggling as a Christian to understand an approach to government that she said smacked of Christo, or I don't know whether they say Christo or Christo-fascism. All right. Later that night, over pizza in Grand Haven, I asked Field Reichhardt, a longtime observer of politics in the county, what he thought was going on. This is a microcosm of what's happening nationally, because they're nationalists. The changes that are threatening American democracy, said Reichhardt, a Grand Haven business person who worked on the presidential campaigns of George Romney, yes, Nelson Rockefeller, Pete McCloskey, George H.W. Bush, and Gerald Ford, a family friend. It says here, the Christian nationalist movement truly frightens me. Reichart, who, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who ran unsuccessfully for Congress as a centrist Republican in 2010 before leaving the Gop and becoming an independent last year, said they think they are doing God's work, and they truly believe it. They are beyond right-wing. They are proud Boysian. That's interesting. I've not seen that formulation yet. Clearly, that's what they are when they refer to diversity, equity, and inclusion as being divisive. Like inclusion. It's not divisive. It's inclusive. We were sitting not far from Tjapkes, who was at the bar with his grandson. He'd been thinking about how big a story this was, and earlier had drawn a comparison to a lengthy strike at an industrial plant in Grand Haven in the 1960s. But, he told me, this is deeper. And this is an interesting link back to the history, I guess, of that strike. But there's a spiritual dimension here that's really concerning to me, because every time I hear all this stuff, I think my Lord's taking a kick in the teeth again, Tjapkes said. This isn't Christianity. I don't know what this stuff is, but it isn't the Christianity I know. He said, I think it's deeper than just political. The ascendance of the far right in Ottawa County is not an isolated case. It happened in Shasta County, California, a red enclave in an otherwise blue state. Conservatives across the country have been making runs at school boards. The problem for hardliners is that in general elections in more moderate districts and states, their brand of republicanism has difficulty traveling. On the morning after the meeting last week, I met with Steve Redmond, the president of the Ottawa County Patriots, another different group, entirely different, over breakfast not far from the county board's offices. His group, which began as part of the Tea Party movement, which, again, I'll pause here just to say, essentially, he received an earlier candidate in a box parcel and organized around that. And that was the flash in the pan at the time. And he rode that to success, I'm sure, locally, and would probably have credited the Tea Party movement with making him a player. But I think the Tea Party people, to the extent that they haven't integrated in this new MAGA, America First type Christian nationalist agenda, have just been swept aside and probably think this is outrageous. How can I be, how could people be rejecting me? I've only been in, quote unquote, in power for 10 years or so. But that's the way these waves work. And of course, the Tea Party swept aside, Reaganites, and Reaganites had swept aside, Rockefellerites, and it just goes in waves like this. But anyway, let's see what he has to say. His group, which began as part of the Tea Party movement, had organized the forums at the church where Ottawa Impact candidates spoke last year. His group's banner hung from the lectern. The Ottawa Impact movement, said Redmond, who is 75 and has been involved in Republican politics for decades, was a natural response to COVID restrictions. It was a parental rights movement, he said, not a Christian nationalism. That's how you disguise it. If you don't want to own up to Christian nationalism, and eventually you will, that's how you'll disguise it. Parents' right. You got to listen to parents. And you can hear the echoes of the Chris Rufo strategy and the Virginia gubernatorial elections of 2019. That box has now arrived. Redmond has opened it. And instead of rejecting it, I guess he's decided to embrace it. And that's how you stay relevant. So it's a smart play. Most of them are conservatives. They vote Republican. Many of them supported Donald Trump. Most of them are practicing Christians, and their faith is very important to them, Redmond said of the Ottawa Impact board members. Yes, in their meetings, they bring up scripture and other things. That's kind of who they are. But I don't think they're trying to create a totalitarian Christian county. I think they're just simply trying to create good governance. Yeah, except, one of the founding principles in this country of good governance is to separate church and state so that there's never any confusion. You don't want to be mistaken for a Christian nationalist, then understand adopt and practice separation of church and state. That will put you in good stead with the Constitution, which if you're a patriot, remember what this guy is supposed to be, right? His group, Tea Parties, Patriots, yada, yada. What's his group actually called? Ottawa County Patriots. That's an important part of it. Now, it's not always easy to exercise if you're well enthralled to your Christian faith and you want to exercise it and everything, and it teaches you to exercise it and everything, but if you're going to be a patriot, you're going to have to separate things. Good governance can be guided by Christian principles, but can't be based on and run as though it were a church meeting. You just can't, it's one of the problems with it is you can't constantly be professing your faith in the state setting. Now, they object to that, but that's because they're Christian nationalists. Well, I don't want to have to hide my faith. You don't have to hide it, but you can't govern using it. Well, I think you should be able to govern using it. Well, then you're a Christian nationalist and not a patriot. I mean, I'm sorry that makes you uncomfortable, but that's kind of what you're doing. That's the definition of what you're doing. You want it to be a different way, and that's a legitimate wish, but it's a different kind of governance, and you should really recognize that. But you never will, because then you'll feel bad about yourself, and you don't want that. The Ottawa Impact-backed board member who agreed to speak with me, Jacob Bonnema, I don't know how he pronounces this, Bonnema, Bonnema, I don't know, told me the same thing, which is to say, I reject it because Christian nationalism sounds bad or hardcore at the moment. Eventually, I'll convince myself that it sounds good and just adopt it. That's what Murdery Trader Green's trajectory has been. But he's still in denial. I believe that this new board wants to promote family values and freedom for everyone in Ottawa County, he said. It is being mistaken and misreported to be only for some rather than for everyone, and I resent that accusation. Well, you're guilty of it, so of course you resent it. Bonnema told me he believed conservative government, quote, is exportable. However, he told me it needs to be done correctly. Yeah. Just listen to yourself. It needs to be done correctly. Well, you're probably going to find Christians and nationalists, but, patriots and yada, yada, people who describe themselves that way all the time. It's the fusion of the two that he means it needs to be done the right way. But okay, it needs to be done correctly. He worried proper processes weren't followed at the board's first meeting. Oh, okay, that's interesting. A departure, which he missed. An opinion that has put him at odds with some of Ottawa Impact's most fervent supporters. Oh, so a fissure here. Redmond, meantime, had more of a political concern. But Bonnema makes a decent point. They shouldn't have done things the wrong way. And I mistook him by saying it needs to be done correctly. I apologize. I'll step back. I won't be supporting him in anything. But he sees some nuance there that I didn't initially give him credit for. All right. For the conservative movement, he said, and we're talking about now is Redmond, who has a more political concern. He said the Ottawa Impact's takeover of the county board could end up being counterproductive if they don't find a way to govern well, dot the I's, cross the T's, follow the protocols, and resolve some of the current critiques. He called it all very resolvable, but there is a risk, he said, if the board cannot cool things down. And very frequently you do see people like this coming in hot and saying, well, all the rules and regulations that are designed to be guardrails against, say, for instance, implementing a Christian nationalist government, excluding others, discriminating against them in the name of, whatever the good name that you think you're working in on behalf of, may be, one of the dangers of coming in so excited is saying all this stuff is red tape and stupid bureaucracy, and everybody hates that, right? Yeah, we all hate that because everybody knows you get fed up with that kind of stuff. So you push it aside and say, we'll just make our decisions like regular old people. We're just a bunch of Christian family people who just want to do right by our county. And so it doesn't occur to them that, yes, we've been elected but not sworn in yet. Let's, to them, it's like, well, let's meet ahead of time and talk about what our agenda ought to be and how to move forward and how to implement the things that we feel like we've been elected to do so that we can hit the ground running. And that makes it sound normal and fine, and there's nothing wrong with it. But ultimately, then somebody will remind you, well, one, you haven't been sworn in yet, so you can't make any decisions on behalf of the county. And two, when you do meet, you should be meeting out in the open. We're not having a meeting. We're not deciding anything. We're just having coffee together and kind of generally getting some direction. And people do operate like that all the time. And they do, and in an official capacity, they shouldn't. And if they're smart and they've been trained in the ways of governance, then they say things at those little get-togethers like, well, obviously, we're not speaking for the county here, and we shouldn't be deciding anything here. Because after all, someone who's been around will tell you, yeah, there's transparency laws. We haven't been sworn in. So let's at least recognize all of that. But for regular people who don't have that experience, they may have just walked straight in and stuck their foot in that bear trap, and, they don't know what they're doing. Anyway, the risk of having so much pushback that some of them would get primaried in 2 years, or they risk having so much pushback, Redmond said. Even worse, if they didn't get primaried, it will set the stage for Democrats to come in and take over, and that would be a real disaster, in Redmond's view, I guess. Ottawa County is so heavily Republican, that's probably a long way off. But the county is one of the state's fastest growing, and change isn't inconceivable. I will, for the people who live in that corner of the state, I will at least tell you, it may seem hopeless. When I moved here to Loudoun County, and where we stand politically these days, right? Even in the big wave election or whatever, the big revolution in 2019 with the election of what's his face, Youngkin, and listened to parents and and they beat the crap out of Loudoun County up and down all over Virginia in order to do it. But Loudoun County didn't go in for the Youngkin thing, and they still overwhelmingly voted for Terry McAuliffe and not Youngkin, despite the fact that not everybody was that enthused about his candidacy. And even in the districts where they, the very school districts where they were beating on the administrators of particular schools, Youngkin didn't win those school districts. I mean, it was pretty staunchly Democratic in its turnout and outcome. But when I moved here, Loudoun County was red, and I mean red, red, red. It was, there wasn't MAGA and the Tea Party yet at the time, but that wasn't that far off. These were Gingrich Revolution and era Republicans. This is still a bedroom community of Washington, D.C. It was red, and it was run by a Republican-controlled board of supervisors that included, longtime listeners to the show will remember, Eugene Del Gaudio, one of the original, I guess today he'd be an anti-transgender activist, but he was anti-gay activist at the time, just generally, and a real reactionary and anti-immigrant and anti-gay and everything. And Lori Waters, who was a Phyllis Schlafly protege, were on the board here. So they were no slouches when it came to keeping up with hot trends in radical republicanism, but they were swept away by an influx of normal people, normies. The normies came in and made Loudoun Democratic. So it may feel like it's a long way off in Ottawa County, and I don't know what's drawing people to Ottawa County, but apparently it's among the state's fastest growing counties. So, hey, maybe you got to talk to people, move them into the county from outside, and change the complexion of the place. Paul Hilligons, maybe I've got that name right, a former Republican Speaker of the Michigan State House from Holland, told me that when you look at the statewide election results, it's clear there are a lot of disaffected Republicans and more Republicans voting independently. And I think we'll see more of that in Ottawa County. I'm guessing if the party continues to move in the direction it's going. And every indication is that the party is going to. In Lansing over the weekend, the state Republican Party selected Christina Caramo, the election denier who lost her race for Secretary of State last year as the party's new chair. And in Ottawa County, Republicans supportive of Ottawa Impact are already privately discussing primarying members of the group backed last year, but who have since questioned some of their actions, including that one guy we didn't give enough latitude to earlier, Bonema. Wow, so they're already going to purge that guy. Because I'm for what you did, but I think you went about it in the wrong way. You're out. Now tell me, that'll be interesting. So ask Bonema later whether the leopards that ate his face are Christian nationalists or not. Oh yeah, those guys are, but I'm not. Okay. This came up during the board meeting last week after Walter Davis, a retired college professor who had promised to speak at every commission meeting for 2 years as a form of protest, told the board that he had to break that promise on the advice of his doctor. He couldn't afford to get his blood pressure up. It turns out being around you is injurious to my health, he said. Wow, good message, huh? Well, we're behind you. I'm sorry that's happening to you. But do take care of yourself. During a break in the meeting in the lobby, I watched Bonema approach Davis and put his hand on his arm. I'm sorry we won't be hearing from you, he told him. I find you interesting, even if we disagree. It was an unusual, if basic, moment of collegiality in an otherwise disagreeable room, and I mentioned it to the man I was speaking with, a resident supportive of the new board. He wasn't offended by Bonema's gesture of goodwill, but he wondered how long he would be around anyway. The far right had taken over the board once. There was a good chance it could reshape it if its elected officials fell out of line. As Bonema walked back into the boardroom, the man standing beside me said, he'll be primaried. And that's the end of the piece. Wow. That's a pretty good illustration of what's going on. So hat tip to Rosalyn for calling it to my attention, and whoever else might have injected it into the timeline yesterday such that I put it in pocket. Getting close to the end of today's show, and gosh, I don't know what we'll end with. But, maybe this one, because it's new news. I have another piece that I wanted to share, but we probably need more time for. Maybe we'll wait for tomorrow. But here's some news from the New York Times, which probably can't get through the entirety of the article, but how much would you need to know beyond the headline and the first paragraph or two? James O'Keefe leaves his post as the leader of Project Veritas, the poorly named Project Veritas. What's going on here? Mr. O'Keefe, the subheader says, had been the face of the group of conservative provocateurs since he founded Project Veritas in his father's garage in suburban New York in 2010. Michael Schmidt on the headline here, or on the byline, along with David Farentholt and Adam Goldman. So it's quite a team. What's the story? We'll see what we can find out in the next 2 minutes or so. James O'Keefe, who was leader of the conservative group Project Veritas, used theatrical stunts, undercover stings, and other deceptive tactics in efforts to inflict embarrassment and charges of hypocrisy and wrongdoing on perceived liberal enemies in politics and the media, has left his post, Mr. O'Keefe disclosed on Monday. I believe that was one sentence. His departure came amid an uproar among the group's staff about his leadership style, his treatment of subordinates, and his use of the group's funds for high-priced expenses like flights on a private plane. Ooh, they're finally going to do something about that, huh? It also came in the midst of an ongoing Justice Department investigation into how Project Veritas acquired a diary kept by Ashley Biden, President Biden's daughter, before the 2020 election. Mr. O'Keefe's home was searched by FBI agents with a warrant in the fall of 2021 as part of the investigation. Project Veritas's board put O'Keefe on paid leave, of course it's paid, earlier this month. Currently, I have no job at Project Veritas. I have no position here based upon what the board has done, so I'm announcing to you all today, on President's Day, I am packing up my personal belongings here, Mr. O'Keefe said, over-dramatically, in a video addressed to the group from its headquarters in Mamaroneck, New York. The group's board later issued a statement saying that a preliminary review indicates that James has spent an excessive amount of donor funds in the last 3 years on personal luxuries, including boats full of dildos, apparently. I don't think they cited him for that one. And that more was being uncovered as the review continued. The board cited as one example $14,000 that it said Mr. O'Keefe spent on a charter flight to meet someone to fix his boat under the guise of meeting with a donor. Yeah, that's not going to go over very well. But I guess that's the SS dildo, and you can't have that sinking. But the board also left open the possibility of working things out with Mr. O'Keefe. We did not fire him, nor do we want him to resign, the board statement said. We would like to continue conversations with James to resolve internal matters rather than litigate them publicly. I'd rather that you litigate them publicly, honestly. Mr. O'Keefe has been the group's leader and provocateur-in-chief since he founded it in his father's garage in 2010. He initially rose to prominence before that, when he used an undercover sting of sorts, to assert that the community organizing group Acorn was promoting illegal activity, which it wasn't, a characterization that was largely unraveled upon scrutiny by law enforcement agencies and in court cases. But that didn't stop, by the way, the Democrats in Congress at the time from jumping on that bandwagon. Please don't hurt us, and voting along with Republicans on a measure to defund Acorn and decharter it, since it got an awful lot of its funding through federal grant programs. And, interestingly enough, among the many things that Acorn did for people, voter registration and countering voter suppression efforts were a part of what they did. And golly, if we didn't turn out to need that later on, but too late. The Don't Hurt Me Brigade really, they hurt us, interestingly enough. Anyway, I'll read you another paragraph before jumping out of here. Project Veritas became a more visible force on the right during the Trump era when President Donald J. Trump, did you know he was president? And some of his supporters embraced O'Keefe, who was invited to the White House and became a frequent guest on Fox News. Among its recent targets was Pfizer, the pharmaceutical company and manufacturer of one of the leading COVID-19 vaccines. Along the way, the group's operations, which often relied on concealed cameras being used by operatives lying about their identity, led to a string of embarrassing disclosures about their targets, but really more embarrassing disclosures about them, as it turns out, which included journalists at the New York Times. And I guess they had to put that in there by way of full disclosure, because it is, of course, published in the New York Times. There's more to it. I'll read over it to see if there's anything more embarrassing about James O'Keefe, and I'd be happy to share that tomorrow. Time now, though, for us to turn things over to Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy right here next on Netroots Radio. We said it together. Jinx.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, what's up on the show next? Joe Biden's remarkable journey to Ukraine reads like a movie script, and maybe he'll read it to us on the show. And then on the rest of the menu, the EPA ordered Norfolk Southern to clean up East Palestine, Ohio's toxic derailment, and the Minnesota Senate approved restoring voting rights for felons. Hooray! All that next.